I'm going to just welcome everybody a little bit right now, and thank you very much for attending this event. Um, this will be the first of several conversations that our Democratic Environmental Caucus of Florida is planning with Democratic candidates, as many as we possibly can. And as soon as Congressman Jolly comes in, we will welcome him. Um, just for your information, there is information in the chat when you click on it, how to send me a message, a comment, a question, so that we can deal with that um, after after the bulk of this is finished. So if you want to make any type of comment, go ahead and do that. Or even just say hello and who you are and where you're from would be fine also. Um, I will begin as soon as Congressman Jolly is able to come in and talk with us. So I will actually, let's see, you're still admitting people anyway, aren't you? So yes.
Everyone that was in the waiting room is currently admitted. We're just waiting on Rep. Jolly.
Okay. Well, so let me tell everyone a little bit about the Democratic Environmental Caucus of Florida, in case you don't know. Um, we are a statewide organizations. We're a caucus, and that means we are uh, authorized under the Florida Democratic Party. Our statewide caucus has now 25 chapters in 25 counties in Florida. Each chapter is part of our statewide caucus. The president of each chapter, um, it it says 32 people entered the waiting room. I don't know what that means, so let's look. Um, okay, so I
Right.
apologize. So there are
Judy
25 of these chapters. Each president of each chapter serves on our state board of directors. Also on that state board of directors are the elected officers. I'm one. My name is Judy Freiberg. I'm president of the state. And there are people on this call, I'm sure. Kim Heise, she's on this call. She is the chair of our communications team. Um, I'm looking to see who else might be. Um, and we are the individuals who basically run the organization. Um, one of the advantages of a caucus is that we are able to endorse a candidate in the primaries. The Florida Democratic Party is not allowed to do that. Your county parties are not allowed to do that, and your clubs are not allowed to do it. But we as caucuses are, and we do. Um, so we are conducting several activities that will tell us basically who we will endorse once the qualifying period's over for candidates. That will happen in June. And those activities will consist of webinars, uh, and we are hoping that the candidates all at all levels will read our environmental policy and platform that is on our website, will attend our webinars. Um, we will send out a questionnaire to individuals who do want our endorsement, and it will be based on our environmental platform, what we want our candidates to do if they get elected. Um, we will also conduct a series of candidate forums particularly for the statewide offices, um, particularly for the statewide offices. And the candidate forums will be uh, conducted after qualifying for all of the Democratic candidates in each category. So all the candidates that qualify, for example, in the gubernatorial race, they would be included in that. Once that's over, then our board will make a decision as to who we endorse for the primaries, which will happen in August. So I've given you as much and killed as much time as I can. I'm gonna probably be, oh, here we are. Good afternoon. How are you? Congressman Jolly? You are muted, so maybe our moderator needs to there we go.
There we
Yeah.
go. I think we got you. My apologies for being a few minutes late, but I appreciate the introduction to how the activity or how the caucus works.
Okay, well, this is good. Well, welcome and thank you very much for attending. We very much appreciate it. Um, I wanted to begin here with an overview of how we came to this discussion because I think it's very important.
Sure.
Um, many many Democratic volunteers and voters believe, Congressman Jolly, you have a political skills to win, and you're demonstrating it every day in the way that you involve yourself in our Democratic organizations with our volunteers. They're enthusiastic about your candidacy and drawn to your campaign. And at the same time, there are environmental caucus members and volunteers and
Hmm.
environmentalists who are not part of our party, who are concerned about your environmental voting record as a congressman. And given that history, are worried about how you would govern as governor, which makes this conversation critical, I think.
That's right.
So it's a conversation that we don't just need to have with you, but really with all of our Democratic candidates. Um,
Hmm.
and so we really want to win in November. So we want our candidates to be able to campaign in a way that will get particularly voters who have been whose needs have not been met by either party to want to vote again.
Hmm.
So one of the things that is a theme in your campaign, which we completely agree with, is the affordability crisis.
Hmm.
One of the things that we are concerned about is how Democratic candidates misunderstand exactly how voters are affected personally and misunderstand how the worsening consequences of climate change and pollution are driving the
Oh,
affordability
sure.
crisis and how much 95%, I made that up in my head, of Floridians hate overdevelopment and hate the destruction of our natural areas. That is what gets us to your voting record in Congress. And I will tell you, when I reviewed your environmental voting record that was set out by the League of Conservation Voters, I swore that you were a card-carrying member of the Tea Party. And then I looked at other parts of your record and I realized that there are parts of that Tea Party philosophy you don't agree with and that you had issue with, and that you're considered to be a moderate Republican and not aligned with many of the Tea Party positions, which surprised me.
Sure.
But it is your environmental record that is generally aligned with the Tea Party positions and really with
Oh.
the Heritage Foundation that preceded and really defined sort of the Tea Party policies. And those positions are based upon what we call conservative principles of fiscal responsibility, constitutionally limited government, private property rights, and free markets. And those, I think, are the principles on which you, I believe, based your voting record. And I could be wrong, so at this point, that's what I want to ask you. Is that
Yeah.
correct?
Yeah. So let me broaden the aperture a little bit because listen, I'm a campaign finance and electoral reform aggressive advocate. I landed on 60 Minutes for saying we've got to break up a lot of the special interest grip. And I want to say all of this with great respect. We're getting to know each other, and we should have a conversation. And you deserve to have every question answered. And it's on me to build that trust. I say that for this reason. Um, I would frame my time in Congress very differently than you just did, where we rely on a single scorecard. You can go back to the film 15 years ago, and I had such um, consternation about scorecard groups on either side of the aisle because it brought things into focus in a very limited way and didn't always tell the whole story. Here's what I mean by that. The Democrats had every reason to say, look at all these votes. You can't trust Jolly. You could paint me extreme if you wanted to. You could pick 10 or 20 votes, say he's extreme. At the same time, my Republican friends were saying, this guy's a progressive, let's kick him out of the party because they were choosing their 10 or 20 votes saying, don't follow it this way. What do I mean by that? As a Republican representing Pinellas County, a coastal community, who spent 20 years working with the Congress for my predecessor in office, who largely authored the offshore oil drilling ban and actually implemented using Department of Defense policy an extension of the offshore oil drilling ban. When I stepped into the House, I carried on his legacy in carrying the water for the oil drilling ban, working with at the time Bill Nelson. Similarly, because of 20 years in the appropriation space, either on staff or on committee, I was one of the leaders in Congress on SERP and environmental or Everglades restoration and what the multi-decade plan would look like. There were some significant votes that were taken with the support of environmental groups when I was on the Appropriations Committee that got me in trouble with Republicans. I later went on to work with and ultimately work for the Ocean Conservancy. At the same time, you could pick out 20 votes and say, wait, that Jolly was wrong on all these votes. And the last thing I'll tell you about that is I probably was wrong on a lot of those votes. I don't want to deny that I was, and I would probably take many of those differently because mine is also a story of change, right? My journey on reproductive freedom and on guns started when I was in Congress. My journey on the environment started when I was in Congress. And so, yes, the last piece of kind of the broader aperture of this is there were some votes that I took then that I definitely wouldn't take now because it was 12 to 15 years ago, and because I think it's okay to grow in politics and to change your mind. And where it's led me to from a very central leadership position is I want to lead with science, follow the science, put resources, financial resources behind the science, and put state policies behind the science. In some ways, the symbolic, and in some ways, the real nitty gritty. We should be a state that recognizes climate change and climate science. We should be a state that actually has regulatory enforcement around environmental violations and in violations of natural resources. We should be a state that pursues additional land banks, invest in clean air, clean water, renewable energies, clean energies, and so forth. So, so we could certainly paint a picture of when I was in Congress 12 to 15 years ago, and that's going to tell one story. I just don't think it's the complete story. And so from there, I guess I would welcome the conversation on more specific issues. As governor, what would I do?
Okay, that's perfect because I'm ready for that. So let me talk a little bit about the votes that you took generally and the concerns. Um, there were several votes basically that were directed to defunding and dismantling environmental agencies. There were votes that were taking redefining pollution standards that you voted for to make it easier for people to pollute. Um, there were votes that you took redefining carbon and methane emission standards to make it easier again for the fossil fuel companies, methane emitters to send more out into the air. There were votes removing the agency's rulemaking authority, votes to repeal environmental regulations, rules, and legislation. Ending local government authority to regulate development's a huge deal. Legal barriers to environmental challenges. When a citizen or an advocacy group wants to sue, you voted to create barriers to be able to do that. The issues become that what is happening or those kinds of votes were actually and I believe when you were voting, from what I can tell, it was at the end of the Obama administration, and most of those votes never came before the Senate, probably didn't get actualized. Some of those votes Obama vetoed. So the concern is that that legislative strategy by the fossil fuel companies, by the people that emit methane, big agriculture, et cetera, that is what has been enacted on steroids in Florida. That same exact policy. That's the concern that everyone has. And that's why I asked you, is it tied back to that sort of conservative philosophy is big government should stay out of our environmental policy, which in this case is an economic policy, which in this case is environmental. And that was my question to you.
Got it. No, I don't think government should stay out of environmental policy. I think it's one of its more critical leadership roles. It is one of the areas where I think what Tallahassee has done through preemption is absolutely wrong. I think we need to reverse much of the preemption. Environmental policy is one of the areas that I think the state's responsibility enforcement is real, and that includes whether it's the proactive adoption of smart growth plans that actually require adherence from local communities with overall smart growth, or whether it is simply the investments that are required either in clean and renewables or clean water or remediation efforts or the prevention of additional destruction. Where I will tell you, and again, I mean this very respectfully, there's no way for me to know those votes that you were speaking of, particularly the way that votes happen in Congress. There could be 12 things on one bill, and sometimes they're designed for political purposes and other times they're not. I'm just saying that it would be very hard for me to litigate votes from 12 years ago. I will give you a vision of where I remember some of those votes, though, as a way to hopefully respond
Yeah.
to it. And and my basic philosophy when it comes to environmental protection or any societal harm or good is that government can use either incentives or mandates, right? If you want to talk about how we balance agriculture or development in the state, we have to use either incentives or mandates to further environmental protection and environmental quality, to either mandate less destruction or to incentivize the adoption of greater environmental stewardship. So I do remember, for instance, the CAFE standards when I was in Congress, the fuel standards that were introduced and implemented by the Obama administration. One of the votes I took to delay the CAFE standards, I know made the environmental caucuses very upset with me. The problem we were reaching is that the mandate could not be met because the incentives had not been provided to allow private sector to development those in a way that were not economically disruptive. Now, I realize that that's the position and the framing of, say, the fossil fuel industry, the auto industry, and so forth. But some of those votes on the annual basis were based on, are we there yet? Do we have the ability for widespread adoption of, in this case, CAFE standards or other standards? And so some admittedly were a balancing decision on my part and what was the right way to ensure that we were actually advancing environmental policy in a way that was not going to otherwise cripple or crimp economic development and economic empowerment. That balance will always be there. Has there been a growth and recognition on my part in the last 10 years that the grip of the special interest on the side of legacy energy and legacy fuels and legacy ag has been so tight, particularly in Florida, that it has led to additional environmental degradation? Absolutely. Listen, when I mention following the science, it's because I know that's not what's happening in Tallahassee right now. I know that's when it comes to agriculture, when it comes to development, when it comes to the fragile ecosystem, when it comes to the protection of natural lands. And so, in many ways, I would be a governor that is focused on reversing many of the current policies of the current majority in Tallahassee.
Right, so let's talk about one thing that you would have a huge opportunity to do if you were governor, and that's restoring regulatory and administrative agencies.
Sure.
Um, and I think I've heard you talk about that. So, um, Florida Office of Insurance Regulation should be an agency working to restore broken homeowners insurance market and at the same time helping consumers enforce insurance contracts when insurers fail to cover legitimate
Right.
claims. It's not it's not populated that way right now, as we know. What would you do to bring back the efficacy of that agency?
Yeah, this is an area of tremendous grift and graft and corruption, if you will. We have an insurance market that's collapsed in Florida and it's not coming back, and it's held together because deep-pocketed insurance companies continue to fund our politicians. Our politicians turn around and offer them bailouts, uh, let them ship their profits out of state and keep their losses here. And then, when the big storm hits, they up and leave and deny all the claims. And so I think we get to do a few things. First, the appointment process using the executive office of the governor is very significant, right? Who runs the insurance commission? Who runs our education commissioner? They get to fire the surgeon general of the state and then replace the surgeon general with someone who believes in public health and science and vaccines. We get to appoint new commissioners to the PSC and to our state university system. So within insurance, here's where I would broadly want to focus the state. And we would need to lead the country and lead the world in this. When I was in Congress, I introduced a national catastrophic fund to recognize that we are unprepared for climate science and climate change. We have failed to address it, and there's no longer an affordable way to cover natural disasters. That's true in Florida. I think we need a state catastrophic fund to fully remove hurricane and natural disaster coverage from the private market, put it in a state cat fund, reduce homeowners insurance by 60 to 70%. We then need to focus in on resiliency, on hardening, on undergrounding, on elevating. We need to focus in on what we require of our insurance companies when it comes to payments for reconstruction, for rebuild. We need to look at what we allow for rebuilding and where we allow for rebuilding to occur. So if we are following the science at the state level, where through regulatory action, we are ensuring that the best science is being pursued that supports the threats of climate change and climate science and promotes environmental integrity, while we're working with the insurance and commercial industry saying, as actors in the economic foundation of Florida, we are only going to begin to cover certain activities, certain types of rebuild, and we're going to provide consumer relief through a state cap fund. And oh, by the way, put people in charge of the Public Service Commission that are going to require and mandate and pursue from our utilities clean and renewable energies and get the backs of ratepayers. That's an entirely different package of economic and environmental leadership in Tallahassee than what we have right now.
That was going to be my next question. The Florida Department of Environmental Protection, Department of Health should work together and be
Yeah,
adequately funded and staffed to regulate pollution, enforce environmental laws, and hold polluters responsible for the
that's
harm
right.
they're causing people. What would you do to cause that, make that happen?
Yeah, look, one of the ways that politicians get away with kind of deregulating is defunding. They defund agencies. And so where they remove enforcement authority, they can, and otherwise they defund. Look, none of this change is going to happen if we don't actually have the enforcement authorities of our regulatory agencies. And then let's use our regulatory agencies to require and pursue the best science. This is something that we can talk about through the lens of environmental stewardship or the economic development of the state, because we have an environmental economy that improves everybody's quality of life. And the only reason that our politicians aren't acting on behalf of the people of Florida is because they're acting on behalf of the private interests that fund their campaigns. I mean, the corruption tie goes all the way from campaign finance to the disparity in environmental policy. And the last piece I would add to this, you touched on it very briefly, kind of the environmental justice piece of this, the disparity between geographies and zip codes, where we allow the greatest environmental degradation or push off the greatest impact, are already in communities where those ladders of opportunity have already been broken, right? A child 5 miles to the north of my kids today have far less opportunities in education and healthcare, frankly, in transportation and upward mobility, in jobs, but also in too many communities, access to clean water and the environment. We see it nationally. The greater economically impoverished communities usually suffer from the greatest environmental degradation. We need a whole new vision for this. One of the things I have done within our campaign, and I have pledged to do this as I serve, and maybe I should have led with this. Our current governor suffers from a very simple vanity. He thinks he's the smartest person in the state. He does. We know that. He's not, but your next governor is not going to be either. I'm not a subject matter expert on many of these issues we're discussing. I'm asking for the opportunity to lead. My view of leadership is to lead shoulder to shoulder, to surround myself with the subject matter experts more capable than I am at achieving the environmental advancements that we need. That doesn't threaten me, that strengthens me. And so within our campaign, we have already built, and our campaign chair, Mitchell Berger, has a long legacy, decades of working within environmental advocacy. He has helped build out, along with so many others, a team of environmental subject matter experts capable of leading the state forward. My hope, my great wish is to get elected and then be able to empower people from across this state to lead together, to lead us forward. That just is not the approach of Tallahassee right now.
Okay, this is good. I want to go off topic a little, but it is absolutely on topic. Would your judicial picks include members of the Federalist Society or judges with a judicial philosophy that threatens our democracy and our environment?
Um, so let's just focus on that second part of the question. Absolutely
Right.
not. We are going to have judicial picks that understand the balance and also understand that the laws have been written for a very specific reason, right? Our clean water laws, our clean air laws have been written and should be enforced at the state level and at the federal level. You know, does once holding a Federalist Society card disqualify you? I don't know. I stay away from the litmus tests and the scorecards. But on substance, I can tell you an active practitioner within the Federalist Society probably today would not align with who my judicial picks would be.
Um, we in the Democratic Environmental Caucus have started what we're calling an environmental justice coalition, which is made up of people that live in these communities. Um, the communities are suffering from severe chemical dumping on those communities. Some of them have been built on um, forever chemicals, basically. Um, some of them, some of the people in these communities are people that have um, been in workplaces where they've been contaminated. There right now, there's a development that is threatening to be built on an abandoned in Florida on an abandoned phosphate mine. I'm assuming that you understand the dangers of the phosphate mining. Um,
Right.
yeah. So there are things that you can do as governor to assist, and particularly in the Florida Department of Environmental Protection. Some of these folks talk about going to the Florida DEP for help. Some people have so much cancer in their throat, it's hard for me to understand what they're describing. Um,
Wow.
Also going to the EPA and having the EPA being so poorly funded that they really don't have the capacity to clean up a neighborhood if they wanted to. So what would you do to bring back the ability of these agencies to help folks?
Well, not just agencies, but the ability for a person to have a personal claim against the polluters. I mean, I think we also have to restore the litigation rights of individuals who have been harmed by this. To the extent we can do that through state level action, we will do that. I'll tell you what it reveals for me. One of the greatest problems I've always had with some of the, you call it the remediation programs or the buy-in programs that we allow polluters to do. I I think we have to get away from models that um, allow polluters to just pay for their pollution by remediating somewhere but destroying somewhere else, right? Seagrass recovery is a great example where, okay, if you go damage a whole bunch of seagrass over here, but we let you plant things over there, somehow we're going to call it a tie. In the space of environmental justice, I think that's where we see the greatest impact, right? We're going to let you build this wonderful Tony community over here. We're going to let you build a facility over here, and all your waste is only going to impact one community over here. And we know through the injustice and prejudice of it all, where that impact, that discriminate impact usually ends up. It's either in economically challenged communities or sometimes majority minority communities. Wherever it is out of the way and out of seen and out of sight. I think we just have to get to a place where we don't allow the pollution, where we don't allow the degradation. right? So when I use incentives and mandates as an example, what is it, if you stick with South Florida right now, what is it that would be required of our ag industry? Is it setting mandates that we know they can meet, that the science will allow them to meet? Great, let's put them into place. They have to absorb the cost and figure it out. Or is it something that requires an incentive partnership? Is it that we further fund the science at University of Florida, or we further fund the Mag Lab at Florida State to allow us to advance a certain economy here while also protecting our environment? Between the mandates and incentives, we have to look for the solutions as opposed to just allowing polluters to pollute and dump their pollution in one part of the state. That has become kind of the cornerstone of environmental injustice at this point.
Okay, so let me flip to the issue of affordability. One of the things that I am ha- have some concerns about, that we have some concerns about, is the issue of Democratic candidates campaigning and talking about things in ways that the voters who are experiencing the issues don't relate to. When people use the term kitchen table issues, for example, I'm going to give you the list of what I believe or that we believe are the are, are 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 what climate change, pollution, et cetera, is causing in terms of the affordability crisis. We've talked about the insurance costs. Um, those insurance companies are really raising premiums, dropping coverage, or just leaving the state because they can't afford to pay
Right.
for all
Mm.
this damage. Um, Housing prices and availability. The people that I know here, where I am in Collier County in Naples, a lot of Republicans, Democrats live on the coast, can't sell their homes. They're no longer saleable. Um, a lot of the inland areas are seeing price spikes because people are needing to move to safer locations. New
Mhm.
construction is more expensive because of stricter building needs or repeated storm damage that people are experiencing. Infrastructure it was a huge issue in the Naples City Council election, is the cost of the infrastructure upgrade because of flooding, because of sewage failing, because of drinking water being threatened by saltwater intrusion. Um, those expensive resiliency projects are going to be astronomical.
Yeah.
Disaster recovery and rebuilding after storms. It's going to show up in higher taxes, fees, and utility bills. We've talked about the energy bills, I think, maybe very superficially, but clearly it's hotter, we have more air conditioning costs, energy's going to shoot up, and they're using very expensive energy because we
Mhm.
didn't transition. You said some things I liked, obviously, which are to use the Public Service Commission and in order to transition to clean energy, which has been missing obviously in Florida. Um, and people are getting sicker because of pollution,
Mhm.
and it's driving up healthcare costs. And lastly, data centers, which is what I want you to talk about, because
Yeah.
all over the country, data centers are a scourge when they get. So, and do you understand? I assume you know about that. What would
Sure.
you do to control this issue of data centers taking our energy and our water, basically?
Yeah, so look, I think we should have a ban on data centers right now. I'll give a little bit more on that, but let me speak more broadly about that whole basket of goods you mentioned to say this. Look, I think we are in a crisis that has been decades in the making. And I'm Pollyanna, but I'm not naive. I don't want to promise that things happen on day one because if politicians could make things happen on day one, the Ukraine war would be over, I'd say,
That's
right?
right.
I think
Yeah,
what we can do on day one is assemble the team that's going to get us out of the crisis and put a way forward. A model that I hearken back to is when Bob Graham had the smart growth plan for Florida. It was largely looking at the environmental impact, but let's broaden that just a little bit and let's adopt a smart plan for Florida. That includes addressing preemption. That includes addressing the PSC. That includes addressing clean and renewables. That includes addressing our state university system. I built a university cohort of advisors where we talk about positioning our universities not for our ideology, but for our economy, right? Where can we lead in clean and renewables or with the Mag Lab? That includes consumer programs for the widespread spread adoption of solar, of clean and renewables. What does smart growth look like in 2026? Because it's very different than when we contemplated it 40 years ago. The broad priorities are the same: reducing environmental impact, improving quality of life, air quality, water quality, allowing for economic growth. I'll finish then where I started on the data center. So I get excited from, again, my leadership perspective, have the really smart people help create what smart growth in Florida looks like to balance and protect all the resources we have, both through stewardship as well as through an eye towards our environmental economy. But then the data centers very specifically, because the issue is so prescient. I think there are three major reasons why we have to hit an immediate pause and say not in Florida. First, we don't have the environmental protections in place. And if my Republican friends did it, they will give it all away to big tech and AI. And I rarely speak about my opponent in this race, but some of the greatest funding for Byron Donalds' campaign is from the tech bros and the future AI industry that wants to be here and is willing to destroy our environment with the data centers. So first, no to data centers because we don't have the environmental protections in place nor the regulatory enforcement that we can trust. Secondly, we don't have the labor protections in place. I worry very broadly about the macroeconomic conditions of Florida, where the K-shaped recovery is calcifying, where the haves are really accelerating fast and the have-nots are falling off. And we're going to lose what we've considered traditionally the middle class. People with mobility are going to leave the state because they can't access housing, healthcare, education. And then the third reason no to AI is we don't have the privacy protections in place. You know, Governor DeSantis's office used language one time, and I give him credit for this. And it kind of showed his willingness to use government as an instrument for good, even though he might consider it big government. He said, until AI can stop outsmarting a teenager and convince them to take their own life, we need to put a hold on this for a moment and look at what we're actually unleashing. So, from the environmental concerns to the labor concerns to the privacy concerns, I just think we're a nation and a world not yet ready for the disruption that's about to happen. And so, I don't want Florida participating in that disruption until we're prepared to and do so soberly.
So one of the things that I talked about the environmental justice communities, and I also talked about the communities that I've been involved in because of the Naples City Council election, higher income. All of them are affected by climate change and pollution in one way or
That's right.
another. And many of the Republican leaders, basically, in these communities are well aware of how the Republican dominated legislature and DeSantis and Trump are hurting their ability to be safe in their homes for one reason or another. Um, One of the things they feel about the Democratic Party is we are so keyed into talking about culture war issues that they feel
Yeah,
the Democratic Party does not relate to their issues. And I'm talking about working class African American communities who've stopped voting for Democrats. And I'm talking about upper class um, and professional Republicans and Democrats, but the Republicans have stopped voting or supporting their own party because they are not dealing with the issues we're talking about.
yeah.
Here's my question. How are you going to message in the general campaign? You're doing a lot of messaging with our base, which are a lot of identity groups, and they do want to hear how you're going to restore democracy and how you're going to stop victimizing immigrants, etc. Um, in the general election, if we want to bring back the disaffected voters and really win, in my opinion, and this is my own personal opinion, we have to reach out to the disaffected voters who are getting clobbered economically. So
That's right.
that's my question to you. How do you do that?
Yeah, thank you. And let me just point out at the top that, environmental issues are one of those issues that really crosses the partisan divide, particularly in Southwest Florida. I mean, when you talk about water flowing east or west from the Glades, those communities don't care if they're Republican or Democrat. When you talk
That's right.
about communities either at the highest end of the economic spectrum or the lowest who are feeling the economic degradation, they don't care about party registration. They want their quality of life to be improved. So your question very broadly on messaging. As I mentioned, I was a Republican. We talked about those votes at the top. Mine is a story of change. I've been an independent for 5 or 6 years of my life. I'm a proud Democrat today, not a reluctant Democrat. I talk about three values that are rooted in democratic tradition, but bigger than our party. And there's a reason why. You'll see how this unfolds. And some of it is using old school Republican language. So first, I think the economy should work for everyone. That's a value. We don't need to fight the haves to fight for the have-nots. We should congratulate success. But the economy is not working for everybody, and it should. The second value is that government can do its part to improve our lives. It should be lean and and accountable. It should be efficient. We should look to the private sector and our nonprofits, but there are certain things that only government can do. And it's our government. We pay for it. We should expect it to do it well. What do I mean? Investments in clean air, clean water, and renewable energies, investments in public education, access to healthcare for more Floridians so that we improve outcomes and reduce the economic toll to the state. Uh, a celebration of both affordable housing, but also home ownership and upward mobility and people's ability to obtain home ownership, whether it's through insurance reform or investments and scaling up workforce housing. Those are things that government does. So the economy should work for everyone. Government can improve our lives. And the last value is that everyone's rights should be protected and their dignity celebrated. Protecting people's rights could be their voting rights, their reproductive freedom, but celebrating their dignity is an old school Republican argument to keep government out of your doctor's office, out of your bedroom, and out of your life. And so, why do I approach this conversation and this race with those values? Sure, all the policies flow from those values. The state catastrophic fund for insurance, a remaking of our state university system, a new Surgeon General, investments in clean and renewable energies, and so forth. But those values, think about it. Within the Democratic Party, could tether together the young emerging progressive with the last blue dog standing, right? The economy should work for everyone. Government can be a tool to improve our lives, and everyone's rights should be protected, their dignity celebrated. But if you're that independent or Republican voter right now who knows that the state is broken, that the nation's in crisis, the economy's gotten away from you, you don't know if you could raise your family here, or your kids and grandkids don't want to stay, your snowbirds don't want to visit because they don't feel welcome or they fear gun violence. If all we're talking about as Democratic leaders is to build a coalition on three values, the economy should work, government can improve our lives, and everyone's rights should be protected, and we should celebrate you regardless of your walk of life. That, I believe, is how we build a coalition for change in November. When you get into the weeds, I'll tell you what, a Republican senator recently told me, retired U.S. senator said, I'm never leaving the Republican Party, but but I'm going to vote for every Democrat this cycle unless you give me a reason not to. And what this retired senator was saying is just ask us to litigate who we are in this moment. Ask us to litigate we're better than this moment. Yeah, that means on some personal matters. We shouldn't have a president sending out racist, anti-Semitic comments or presenting himself as Jesus Christ. We shouldn't have gubernatorial candidates doing that either. We got to believe we're better than who we see in leadership right now. But part of litigating who we are is that kind of post-World War II responsible administration of government. Are we making sure everybody can earn a living? The government's doing its part to educate your kids and protect your environment and make sure you have health care. And are we protecting your rights and dignity? That to me is what has made America great. And so I often say, we're never going to really make America great until we make America good again. Part of this is just fighting for the goodness of what this nation has been able to pursue, but that goodness has been rolled back. And I think there's enough runway there for Democrats to lead a new coalition with independents and Republicans as well.
Um, I want to go over some of the questions that I was sent in the last week. And most of them you've answered, so let me read this and see what you haven't. There are a lot of questions on the data, the
Data centers.
data centers. Thank you. Um, Given the unpopularity of regulatory oversight with many potential voters, are you willing to mention the need to, that I think it's directed at me, the need to strengthen the the FDEP and WMD's role with regard to including monitoring or existing specific water quality standards, the criterion issuing permits, etc. These agencies overwhelmingly admit such requirements with their reference to presumptive criteria. Do you understand that question and can you answer
I look, I do think it's a matter of, are we willing to use regulatory authority for enforcement?
it?
And then are we willing to pursue regulations through executive action or working with the legislature, again, to improve the framework of incentives and mandates that move us towards better science? The answer to that is yes and yes.
Okay.
And I don't see that as being in conflict with the broader constituency. I mentioned working for the Ocean Conservancy. One thing privately they would often ask me to do is help us frame Republican language around this, right? That the reason I would talk about an ocean economy was so that I was hoping my Republican colleagues would hear this a little differently. Now, I don't think they want to hear it differently because too often they're captured by industry. But voters understand that. Voters understand we have an ocean economy, an environmental economy, and they understand they want their kids growing up with clean air and clean water.
So that gets me to something that I did notice in your record, which I was interested in, relating to money in politics. And I believe you tried, I don't know if you were successful, to introduce a resolution to get to require that people not solicit funds during the end of. Can you talk
Right.
about that? Because one of the things I will tell you, my big thing is, I think you're absolutely right. We've got to end Citizens United. We've got to end PACs who are buying our politicians, basically. I
That's
completely
right.
agree with you. So I was interested in that. Could you please explain it?
Yeah, I think we have the most corrupt campaign finance system in the entire world as a country.
Yeah.
And within the country, I think Florida probably has the most corrupt campaign finance system in the entire country. I'm for the public financing of campaigns. That's kind of my North Star. Obviously, that requires a bunch of mountains to be climbed, including some Supreme Court decisions. But what can we try to do immediately? I think we should ban the unlimited political committees in the state of Florida. I think whether because they launder money and you end up in situations like Hope Florida, or whether because some of our largest industries are funneling money to politicians, I think we should ban the unlimited dark money and even the unlimited transparent money. I think we should ban if as a simple measure we want to allow the political parties or committees to continue to raise, okay, maybe that's a compromise, but I think we have to move towards public financing of campaigns. What I offered in Congress, and I'm an attorney by training, was a very constitutionally sound proposal. I spent about 6 months on it and boiled it down to a bill that was just 1 or 2 pages. It would have prohibited a member of Congress from directly soliciting a contribution. The idea was we require sitting members of Congress to spend 60 to 70% of their time raising money, not doing their job. So
Yeah.
you have the corruption and access piece, but you also kind of have the fact that people aren't actually even doing their job, what we elected them to do. What I believe is happening in all of this is corruption will emerge this cycle as a real issue in Florida, right? Whether it is because of the for-profit charter schools, whether it is Hope Florida, whether it is the developers that, have received appointments within the state of Florida by DeSantis for their political support, or whether it's the grip of our utilities or other industries. Corruption is going to end up part of this conversation. Ultimately, I think we need voices of reform to further emerge and then meet a moment of crisis. What I said when I did this in Congress, I ended up on 60 Minutes. They did a full profile of me on 60 Minutes, right? This young member of Congress willing to take on the system. It was called the Stop Act, stop asking for money. Um, but ultimately, what I said on 60 Minutes, which I still believe, is sadly, it's going to take a national scandal before we're willing to consider campaign finance reform again. And then the test for us is whether or not shame even matters in our politics anymore,
Right. Yeah.
and whether or not we're willing to feel the shame that leads us to reform.
Mm. Just so you know, one of the webinars we plan to do, Florida will captain it, but it's going to be a national webinar that we put on with our DNC Climate Council, and it is on this very issue, is because I really don't see if we I mean,
That's right.
Trump famously met with the oil executives in 2024 and asked for $1 trillion for his
Yeah,
campaign.
that's right. That's
Right.
right.
And so
Let
I
me,
just don't,
Judy,
yeah,
can I offer a
yeah,
perspective? This is really just as friends. Sure, I'm a candidate, and I hope I can build trust and get your support. This is more
yeah,
an esoteric conversation because I've been in politics for 30 years. I've been a consultant, a manager, and a candidate. We started off talking about some of my initial votes. I could tell you today that never once did I have a vote for sale, right? And I think I proved that by being someone always breaking from my party, returning special interest money that came in, and I found out about it later. I was one of the few people that would give it back. Um, I ended up on 60 Minutes, right? I hope you trust that what I'm about to say comes from a place of reform. A lot of times politicians make decisions based on the information that is presented to them and available to them. When I first ran for Congress in a special election, it was at the time the most expensive race in congressional history. The most expensive. $15 million in about 10 weeks. I raised about $1.5 million of it. All the national groups came in, and people on both sides were trying to make my opponent, who now my friend Alex Sink, and myself, we were both being presented as evil and out of touch and all this. I say that for this reason. Conservation voters, legal women voters, a lot of groups came in before I had ever taken a single vote and sought to destroy me and sought to define me based on a certain too often partisan allegiance, just as all the groups on my side tried to do it against my opponent. I'm not saying any of it's right or wrong. I'm asking you to think about how how candidates and politicians get information. So then I get elected, and that continues, right? I'm in a 50-50 district, and all the partisan affiliated groups on one side are trying to destroy me, and those that are notionally trying to work with me become the groups that are giving me the information, the framer for votes. Not transactionally, but when you talk about waters of the US, or when you talk about some of these votes we talked about at the beginning, the overwhelming framing that I was using was framing from people that I was working with, where I then developed organizational alliances, whether with gun violence prevention or protecting Social Security and Medicare, or because people began to see, wait a minute, this guy Jolly, he's actually with us on some votes. He is leading on offshore oil drilling, or he's leading on environment on Everglades restoration. We'll start working with him. As those relationships developed, that became a greater source of shared information and impacted my framing and my decision making and my judgment and my discernment. And so this is where this conversation becomes so important, not just today, but moving forward. When I say I'm not the subject matter expert, right? But certainly any candidate, any sitting member of Congress today or governor who has presented only one framing on some issues ultimately may find themselves making decisions based on that framing. And so the broader conversation we're having today is so critical to make sure that we have a relationship of trust where, again, the science leads and the subject matter
right,
expertise leads,
right.
and then we go out and trust together to improve Florida for the next generation.
So one of the reasons I wanted to have this conversation is exactly what you said, is I know how many of the environmental groups work. And what they do is alienate people that would be our allies once they get elected.
It's true.
And then
It's
we
true.
can't work with them. And I learned that in the work I've been doing with Naples City Council.
Right.
You Right. And so I wanted you to answer your record as it was framed for this very reason, because I think first of all, I think any politician deserves that.
Sure.
Anybody running for office. It's not easy to run for office, and it's difficult, I think. It's difficult. You have to have a thick skin, obviously. Um, and so I completely agree with you. To me, this should be the start of a conversation with the Environmental Caucus. And if you get elected, there are many things I would want to work with you and our state legislatures on for Community Redevelopment Act. I don't know if you know anything about that. That could be a
Right.
huge gift to these environmental justice communities that need a
That's
lot of
right.
money. And all that money is going to, guess where? Real estate developers, design district, business districts, all over Florida.
Right.
So to me, that is the reason I did want to do this, because I think that. if I think you do have a good chance of elected. You're very skilled, and you're showing that, as I said in the beginning. And I did, okay, so let me see if I want to, I know you probably have to go, and I want to make sure
Oh,
I
that's
get
okay.
people's questions
Yeah,
in.
I was a little late. We certainly have a few more minutes if you all do as
Okay,
well.
all right. There are questions in here about affordable housing. This is a great one. I don't know who wrote this, but I want to meet them, whoever wrote this. Housing was affordable before 2000, somewhat affordable, they say. The book by William Bill Black, Best Way to Rob a Bank is to Own One, details exactly how our housing was turned into a Ponzi scheme for Wall Street. Building more housing doesn't work. And one of the things I did also want to talk about is the affordable housing crisis
Yeah,
and the Live Local Act, which is basically a gift to real estate developers.
right, right,
There are all sorts of ways, if you understand how local government works, where people pretend to say they're going to build affordable housing are allowed to increase the density, and then it doesn't go to affordable housing at all. So,
right.
I don't know again if you're familiar with all that, how the ins and outs of that work, but is going to involve again legislative action to fix this and to fix that
Yeah.
Live Local Act. And I think that was this guy's point.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And when I mentioned the smart growth
Yeah.
plan, this becomes an
Yeah.
element of smart growth, right? Because there are a lot of factors contributing to the cost of housing. Part of it is supply and demand. We are, in Miami-Dade, 105,000 units short, in Palm Beach County, 80,000 units short. But then it also is impacted by the cost of insurance and taxes and utilities. When insurance and taxes and utilities far outweigh even the cost of the note, that's also representative of a crisis of this generation that was not a crisis 30 years ago, right? It used to be your note was the biggest part of your monthly mortgage. Now it's your insurance and your taxes. So there are some direct things that government can do to begin to reduce the acceleration of increased housing. But I also think when we talk about affordable and workforce housing, a couple of things. First, we have programs that work. We just don't invest enough in them. Where it's working, let's scale it up and put more resources into it. What do I mean? Additional units that are being built in Miami-Dade County that are qualifying families based on income or trades or proximity to work, whether they're through tax agreements with the developer or whatever the agreement is. Where it's working, let's do it. Palm Beach County, Riviera Beach, has a $100,000 forgivable note for first-time home buyers of a certain income to try to move them into home ownership. It's an opportunity program that really works and works well. Where it's working, let's scale it up. But I think to your point on that last one, where we where we focus on affordable housing, we sometimes don't focus on entry-level housing. And what I mean by that is I do think it's worth studying some other areas, other states that have pursued entry-level housing as a component of addressing the housing shortage, right? Not every house is going to be 1,800 to 2,500 square feet, certainly not 3,500 square feet. Some of the entry-level housing has to be designed to be more affordable, not just because it is the same units available at a subsidized rate, but because we're actually building more to accommodate the diversity of labor within the state. Otherwise, 20 years from now, the state of Florida is going to look like the Hamptons. And we're just going to have a crisis where you have the wealthiest among us and you have a permanent underclass, and kind of the heartbeat of the economically middle class leaves the state because it's out of reach for too many people.
And I would say that if you use things like CRA funding, there's a lot of affordable housing people are in that are not safe or sanitary, and we should
Oh,
upgrade
certainly.
those before we start worrying about building other units, in my opinion. And you've
Yeah.
got the CRA money, which is gold if we know how to use it.
Yeah,
Um,
look, there's
yeah,
a project in Miami-Dade that I often point to. I'm not suggesting it's perfect, but it is kind of
yeah,
fascinating. It is on
yeah.
top of a public transportation transit center in the heart of a growing, economically robust, young up and coming district where they built, call it 12 levels of, a tower of 12 floors of condos or housing.
Mhm.
3 or 4 of them are affordable based on income and qualification, but you wouldn't know it, right? But it's additional units right in the heartbeat of the city alongside the market-based units. And they did it because the government required them to do it, because the government said, okay, we're going to allow you to build this, but you're going to provide a certain number of units. And to your point, there's no disparity then in the basic social investments around that housing development, clean air, clean water, transportation, access to healthcare, access to jobs. That's an area where government did really well. It's a very successful project. Where it works, let's do more of it. Well, let's do more of it. Let's be a state that chooses to pursue successful models.
Right. So now that was Julia from Pinellas who put this in the chat from Lauren in Live Oak. I'm a farmer in North Florida. Farmers in Florida are really hurting. With development encroaching, clean water always is an issue. Fertilizer prices at an all-time high. How important do you think it is for the state of Florida to support regenerative agriculture as a way to
Oh my.
enhance and protect biodiversity, clean the environment, restore the water cycle, and help farmers become more resilient in the face of climate whiplash?
I love this question, and please consider being part of our leadership team. Regenerative medicine is an area that I continue to have conversations with the ag industry for this reason. Everything you just listed, right? Environmental carbon capture, environmental quality, the ability to reduce using fertilizers. But this also becomes a question of incentives and mandates. Where should we incentivize the additional use of it? What can the state do more? And then where do we begin to intersect that with mandates? Because where we know it works, if it's an economic and environmental good, that is the point of public policy. The balance has to become that we pursue it without putting good folks like you out of business. How does that allow for the future of ag? 3 major industries in Florida: ag, tourism, and development. They have been and they will be. What do we do to ensure ag, and particularly when you move to fruits and other crops, that the future of ag is robust and provides the opportunity? Some of that is just the raw protection of the lands to not allow encroachment, right? What we talk about with Old Florida, part of the beauty of Old Florida, but also the economy of Old Florida is agriculture, and it's okay to stand up for it. And then where do we use the intersection of incentives and mandates to pursue greater environmental stewardship, but also ultimately greater profit? Because the future of ag and the future of environmental science should also lead to more efficient and economical models for the industry.
Okay, so now, oh, here we go. Drew asks Congressman, do you support full funding for the EPA? And would you appoint the EPA? Would you appoint members to the Florida Fish and Wildlife Commission who are environmentalists who will protect Florida's wildlife? Multiple questions from attendees about restoring science-based leadership in entities charged with protecting Florida's delicate environment.
Yes. So yes to the EPA, obviously a federal question, but I would be a governor that not only supports it, I intend to use the office of governor to litigate, to go into federal court on behalf of the people of Florida, where there is an eligible federal claim together with other governors, probably from blue states. We're going to go into federal court and fight for either compliance or funding or environmental justice. When it comes to fish and wildlife, and I know this is not a mistake, we always colloquially refer to this, but I always step up and say conservation is in the agency's title. I already publicly opposed the bear hunt because it was using faulty science. We have put in charge of our FWC, whether it is the trophy hunting community or the developers or others that intend to extract utility and profit from our land, as opposed to providing stewardship of our land and increasing our land banks. Yes, we need completely new leadership at the Fish and Wildlife Conservation.
Okay, thank you. And moving along, let's see. What is your position on the coral reefs off of the South Florida shorelines to renew and build these reefs back to protect our shores and land they were created to protect?
Yeah. Look, this is where water pollution and runoff really has its greatest impact. And whether that is federal or whether there are things we can do at the state level, we have to. We have to. And so is it, this is not the exact model for the reef system per se, but are the reservoirs going to actually help solve the east-west water contamination issues in South Florida? If so, if that's where the concurrence of science is, let's pursue that. But where else then in protecting the reefs, particularly as we move south from there? Where are federal and state regulations appropriate? Where does the enforcement come in? And then what projects do we need to fund? For several years, I represented Florida Keys, then Florida Keys Community College. I think it's now Florida Keys College or Florida Keys State College. And two of the programs we worked on, first was in shark research, and second was in the fragile reef, the loss of the reef. And it's measurable, as you know this very well, largely due to the acidity of the water and other pollutants in the water. We can't control what the feds ultimately do. We can't control what happens from federal waters or out of the state of Florida, but where it becomes onshore pollution that is degrading our water, contributing to the loss of the reefs, we need to change that law or policy or enforce the laws on the books and put resources behind it.
Okay, so Hillary asked, what about sugar burning? She's talking about cane sugar burning. What would you do with respect to that? How would you stop that?
Yeah, so this is an area of incentives and mandates in science. And I think to the layperson, it is obvious that sugar burning is a pollutant. I think what you will hear from ag is, yes, but the air quality is no worse than other parts of the state. Well, other parts of the state have buildings and cars and highways and all other types of pollutants. So I'm not sure we should measure, the air quality in the Glades by the air quality in Orlando or Miami and suggest that somehow that's the standard. Um, I think the argument often coming back is that, well, the transport of the waste creates greater weight of the transport and more trucks on the road, and where's the balance? This is where I would tell you I don't want to have a magical solution to all this other than to stick probably in this conversation with the North Star of let's pursue the best possible science and put funding behind it and use mandates or incentives. So I say that as a layperson because of this. If it is true that not burning, but loading all the cargo on trucks and sticking them on the roads every day creates greater environmental impact, well, then we got to figure out that problem as well. But if that is not the argument supported by the science, well, then let's move on burning and let's address burning directly. This is where I will trust the environmental scientists that help lead the state, and we will pursue policies that are aggressive in protecting air quality, regardless of what that ultimate outcome is.
Thank you. All right, Susan asks regarding solid waste management policy. Florida's home to at least 10 waste to energy facilities where our municipal solid waste, including plastics, is incinerated, resulting in the emission leaching of carcinogens into our air, water, and soil. One of the reasons waste to energy is so prevalent in our state is that there is a goal of having 75% recycled, and incineration of our waste at WTE facilities is considered recycling. Would you support legislation that would reclassify incineration at WTE as not recycling?
It certainly doesn't seem like it to me if it has the leaching and runoff burden suggested. And so if not, if the degradation is does not support the recycling standard, or yeah, if the impact and degradation does not support the recycling standard, then we should not assign it.
Yeah.
This has to be an area where I start to say, I'm going to trust scientific advisors on this who are not captured by industry, but are captured by the science and are going to advise me on that.
I know that our local League of Women Voters has done extensive research on recycling and agrees with Susan.
Good, good.
Okay, Maria, execution of our agenda depends on what's happening in Tallahassee. We currently have 40 state legislative seats unchallenged. We landed in the superminority in 2022 when 50 Republicans went unchallenged. How do you plan to govern without more
Yeah.
Democrats in the state legislature? I was recently at the DNC meeting. Maria, so was I. The best line I heard was, "No one runs alone."
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, let me give you broad analysis and then a little campaign theory here. The broad analysis would be if Florida's voters elect a Democratic governor, I really believe we will have cracked a supermajority. It's hard to see a
Mm.
Democratic governor winning, but not picking up Democratic seats. Emily Gregory being a perfect example, Brian Nathan being a
Yeah,
perfect
yeah,
example. We're winning in places up and down the ballot. So then the question becomes, can we run more people responsibly in more districts? Take the top of the ticket out of it for a minute. I do think this is a cycle where if you're considering running, run. Let's put people on the ballot. Let's get Democrats out there because we're going to win places where we haven't thought to win. The the prudent and responsible consideration is, do we have resources to do that? And we want to make sure we don't get into a quality control issue with some of the candidates, right? Just to go down and sign up may or may not be the right approach. But the more we can make prudent decisions and run more candidates, we create a statewide communication service and field operators. Now, I will move to the top of the ticket, right? When I got into this race, I was hoping we would see a surge in resources early, and that where the state party may have lacked the resources, we could come in as a candidate and fund more down ballot candidates. Because not only does it help us win seats, but it also creates field operations in all of our legislative districts. I don't think the funding is there yet to do that. Should it get there, we should. I do think we're going to have an opportunity when Florida elects a Democratic governor to break the supermajority, have a line item veto that is very effective. And
yeah.
then also, as I mentioned earlier, the power of the appointment process, from the Surgeon General to the Education Commissioner to the PSC to our state university systems. Yeah, some happen on day one, some have to go through Senate confirmation, others are deals. But the reality is that appointment process is really powerful. And then the opportunity to litigate becomes very powerful as well as a Democratic governor in a red state.
Um, what you're talking is one of the things I've been extremely concerned about. One of the reasons that I really wanted to discuss with you the affordability issue, which is something to campaign on. It is my view, from what I can hear from our candidates, particularly the new ones, is they're campaigning really around culture wars. They're not reaching out to those. I could be wrong, but I just don't see how we can win elections as Democrats if we don't bring back working class voters, who are the people that are hardest hit by the affordability issue. And that is one of the reasons I kept talking about it and delineating all that. If our candidates don't understand why the affordability issue is happening, who it's happening to, they're not going to be able to engage with voters very well. That is my
That's right.
biggest concern when we talk about especially young, new candidates who have never run before. So if you
That's right.
don't mind talking about that, that's why I asked you how you plan to reach out to those
Yeah.
voters. Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you. Look, I have a 10-point plan for everything, right? But the moment you're explaining a 10-point plan, yeah, maybe you have people, maybe you've lost them. The likelihood is you may have lost them. The importance of what you just said, understanding that the economic crisis, and I use the term economic crisis now because it's true. More people going without health care, people not knowing where to access schools, people losing their homes. That's an economic crisis, bigger than affordability. When you are able to communicate a vote to a voter that you get that, you've just built trust. You've just built trust.
Yes.
When you're able to say, I
Yeah.
understand the greatest issue is the
Right.
economic crisis, they give you a long runway on what the solutions are, right? Most people don't want to talk about the economics of a state catastrophic fund for insurance or a 10-year rebuilding of our public
Right.
education
Yeah.
system, two things I support. But when they know you're fighting for an economy that works for everyone, that's the reason I use that language. The economy should work. Government can do a little bit to improve your lives. I will also tell you an area where we sometimes get things wrong. All of us in politics, both parties, but let's just talk as Democrats here for a moment. We sometimes think that because we're in one community, they only care about one thing. Immigrants must only care about immigration. That's wrong. That's wrong. That's not true. Many in your immigrant community care most about whether they have a job, can get health care for their kids, and where their kids are being educated. Now, in this era where someone's status is being challenged, they certainly understand cruelty and broken promises. And that's why we see a lot within that community coming back to us. But 2 years ago, we were using language in those communities about xenophobia and racism and anti-immigrants, and language I used and still believe in, but that wasn't the most important issue. We were talking about something that the community didn't want to talk about. They wanted to talk about jobs and education and healthcare. So we have to make sure we're doing that. And then likewise, we have to be sensitive. Not every community is monolithic. We understand that. And so particularly in some communities, communities of color and some of our immigrant communities, questions like reproductive freedom are far more nuanced than sometimes we present them. And if we want to show respect, we need to show the respect of understanding, look, we're fighting for the constitutional protection and freedoms for everybody so that you can celebrate your freedoms just like others could celebrate theirs. Acknowledging and giving credence to what a position might be. Similarly, on school choice, a lot of immigrant communities in particular are really fond of school choice because for some communities, again, not monolithic, the history of state-sponsored schools is something that they have great reticence about. I say all that because we should be thoughtful about what is the central message of our campaign. And the truth is, we have an economic crisis, and I believe we're exhausted by the culture wars. Whether you agreed with them or not at one point, I certainly didn't. But we have an economic crisis and we're exhausted by culture wars. So let's be the party saying, look, we understand that. We're going to fight for an economy that works for everyone, using government to help out a little bit. And we're going to fight for everybody's rights and dignity. And that's it. That's all we need you to think about and litigate this cycle.
Right. Thank you. One more question, I believe, in the chat. Would you protect our state parks and urge funding to address deferred maintenance?
Yes, and no golf courses and no developments in our state parks. Let's let our parks be parks and let's have more of them. I know Florida uses a little different language. I use the word land bank. Let's land bank everywhere we can. Not because we're going to give $100 million to a developer for 2 acres, which something crazy and absurd like that happened in the Panhandle. But yes, let's invest more in preserving our lands and using the state park service to be the administrative authority for it. And let's make sure the resources are there so that the quality of the experience and the protection of the environment is maintained.
Thank you. So I'm going to do a little point of privilege here and just give a little plug to ask people to join our caucus and then give you the last words. How's that?
That sounds great. Good.
So here, this is a conversation, as I said, we want to have with our Democratic candidates, all of them. And because it's really important that they understand the level to which the environmental issues, include in particular climate change, are driving this affordability crisis people are talking about. We need help to do that. So, everyone on this call, if you haven't already done this, join your local caucus, join our state caucus. It is only $10 to join our state caucus a year. It is $15 in most of the other caucuses. If you don't have a caucus, you want to start one there, we're happy to help you. We need help to win in November. It is our role as a caucus to make sure that we improve the quality of the Democratic candidates, which means that they understand exactly how environmental issues are affecting voters so they can campaign better and they can win. And they understand when they get elected that they will implement good environmental policy and really help people. So, our next webinars will be ending the ability of polluters and greenhouse gas emitters to purchase our elections, ways that we can end money in politics, affordability and environmental issues, and overdevelopment. We plan to have one on data centers. Hopefully that would also be a national webinar. Please find a candidate that you like, lend your volunteer help, or donate. Help your local county party sign Democrats back up for vote by mail. Help get out the vote, with the get out the vote activities. And with that, I will really thank you so much for your time, Congressman Jolly, and give us your closing thoughts.
Here's my closing thoughts. I'm going to join the state Democratic Environmental Caucus. How's that? And you can too, right? I just did it in 30 seconds. I just found it on your website. There's a barcode, there's a place to join. I just didn't know my Act Blue password. Otherwise, I would have done it while we sat here. But I'm going to join tonight. So, but I say that, look, not to be transactional. I say it to demonstrate a couple things. Please know that I believe in the agenda of the caucus, but also know that participating in conversations like this are going to improve me as a candidate, refine me as a candidate, and hopefully as the next governor, make me smarter and more capable of leading. And I would welcome you to be a part of that leadership team and be a part of this. It's early. Obviously, this caucus hasn't made endorsements but to the extent that you're drawn to our campaign, we would love to have you volunteer or support us. And ultimately through the primary, let's go out united to win. We have an opportunity to win this race. Poll after poll shows that this race is now a pure toss-up, that change is here. And so from now until November, we've got to put in the work every day. I mentioned the three values every day. This is about the economy working, government improving our lives, and everyone's rights being celebrated, because we can mobilize Democrats in that environment and bring in the independents and Republicans we need. I promise you, as a governor, I will show stewardship of the environment, but also promotion of our environmental economy. We're going to pursue the science, we're going to fund it, and we're going to make sure state policies follow it. So thank you for the opportunity to be with you today.
Thank you so much. Thank everybody for participating. We are recording this, and as a result, we will be putting it on our website and on our social media, and then anyone who wants to use parts of it or all of it can put it on their social media and their websites, and share it with other folks. And with that, I really, really appreciate all of your attendance. Thank you so much.
Thank you.